Ready? We're on? Good morning. We begin today's daf, Bava Kamma, daf Samach Ches. We thank Samuel Wolf for sponsoring all the shurim and the drashas of this month, with immense gratitude for the refuahs from Hashem and merit of refuah shleima for all those who need it, and the zechus of our brave Israeli soldiers and hostages. We also thank Leah Sol for sponsoring all the shurim of the month of Tevis as zechus for refuah shleima for her daughter Alana Bas Esther, for the safety of our soldiers and the safe return of all the hostages and the families. Mirza Hashem, all those who need refuah should have refuah shleima keharafayin, and all those who need Yeshua should be zochah to have a Yeshua. We also thank Saeed and Simha Ken for sponsoring Daf Yomi today for refuah shleima for Idan Amadi and for Eliyat Neshama, for the Eliyat Neshama for the fallen soldiers, for Yakir Hexter, Gabriel Blum, David Schwartz, Roe Tal, Amit Moshe Shahar, Dennis Krichmalav Vexler, Ran Efrimi, Roe Avram Maimon, and Akiva Yasinski. In the merit of our Talmud Torah, all those who have lost their lives protecting Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael should have an Aliyas Neshama, and all their families should have a Nechama. We also dedicate all the shurim of Maseches Bava Kamma in the memory of Master Sergeant Yomi Harush Hashem Yikam Dameh, who was one of the first officers killed by Hamas while heroically defending and protecting Am Yisrael and his community during fierce battle at the Sderot police station. May our collective learning bring an aliyah to his holy neshama and a zechus to his beautiful family. Amen. Today's daf is Bava Kamma, daf Samach Ches. We're going to pick up on daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis 67b, about 5 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara begins with a quote from the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us, the entire discussion over here that we are having is with regard to the payment of kefil, and we are going to continue the discussion about yeyush, about whether when a person despairs for their item ever being returned, is that a significant way of a person actually giving up ownership of the item? Does the item transfer ownership once yeyush takes place? So the Gemara says as follows: if a person steals something from the thief, so person 1 is a thief, he steals an item. Person 2 steals it from the first thief. The halacha is that second ganav, the second thief, does not pay tashlumi kefil. Now Rashi in the Mishnah told us, because it says in the pasuk Gunam the Beis Ish, I just will mention that Tosfos mentions that if you paid attention to the last couple amudim, then you'll realize that it's not so clear that the pasuk actually can teach us this, because the pasuk might be talking about Toh and Tanas Ganov, and therefore we have to use another pasuk. But regardless, whether you're learning like Rashi or you're learning like Tosfos, you have a pasuk in the Torah that tells us that the payment of kefil is only relevant when a person steals it from the original owner. When a person steals it from the thief, there is no payment of kefil. A person does not have to pay back twofold. Now, Amar Rav goes on to explain the Mishnah. Lo shanu, this halacha that a second ganav does not pay kefil is only relevant el lefnei yeyush. If the second time the item was stolen was before the original owner actually despaired, he gave up and never getting it back. Now, if the second thief stole it after the original owner gave up on never getting it back, the halacha is kano ganav rishon. The first ganav, the first thief, actually now owns the item. It's true that he owns it in a way which is unbecoming because he stole it, but the bottom line is he owns it, and therefore for ganav sheni mishalam tashlumi kefil ganav rishon, the second thief indeed will pay the payment, the additional double payment to the first thief. Amar Rav Sheshes commented on this statement of Rav. Amina, I believe I'm going to say, Kinayim v'shachiv Rav Amar Laha Shmaita. I think that Rav made this statement when he was dozing off, when he was falling asleep. If you remember on Shabbos, we had the exact same phrase that was used about Rav. The Rav made a statement that Rav Sheshis believed was said when Rav was falling asleep. And on Shabbos, we already explained that, well, Rav Sheshis was trying to point out that he does not understand what Rav is talking about. He found a very respectful way to make that statement. What is the respectful way of making that statement? So the way I explained it on Shabbos is that Rav was a person who was never ever stopping to be Mechadesh Chedushei Torah. Rav had the ability to be Mechadesh Chedushei Torah whether he was awake, whether he was sleeping, whether he was falling asleep, and he always was being Mechadesh Chedushei Torah, and this was Rav Sheshis' way of saying, listen, Rav, perhaps you are Zocha to be able to understand the depths of Torah even in your sleep. And perhaps even while you're sleeping, you understand Torah, even on a deeper level. Nevuah happens when a person is sleeping. But I, Rav Sheshis, am having a hard time understanding what you're talking about when you make this statement. So it was a respectful way for Rav Sheshis to say that what Rav said is beyond my level of understanding. And therefore he went on to explain what the difficulty he had with Rav's statement, which essentially means that Yeyosh itself, that when the owner despairs from ever getting his item back, that actually constitutes a kinyan, an acquisition to the Ganav. The Tanya, so Rav Sheshis explains, we learned in the Rabbi, Some Rabbi Kiva, why is it that the Torah tells us that when a ganav, when a thief steals something and then goes ahead and slaughters the animal, or goes ahead and shechts the animal, or goes ahead and sells the animal, that he has to pay an additional penalty of 4 or 5 times its value? He explained, Rabbi Kiva explained, he ultimately dug his heels in. He rooted himself deeper into the chay. There's a person who sometimes steals something. It's a terrible thing to steal something. But then there's a person who steals something and then digs in. Not only have I stolen it, now I'm going to go ahead, take further possession over this item. So when a person goes ahead and takes the second step of the theft, which is to steal it, stealing it, number 1, but to sell it or to shecht it, which is digging your roots in even deeper, in such a case, the Torah says you have to pay a fine. Now, we're going to analyze that. Ilema, if, like you're telling me, that this is talking about lifnei yeyosh, it happens before he actually steals the item, mi'ika nishtaresh, top of samach chesem at aleph. Is there actually a halachic nishtaresh? Is he actually digging his roots in even deeper? What's the problem with that? So just to understand, what Rashi points out over here is halo ahanu maisav. In other words, there are some times that a person can do something, the action is quite significant, but the result of that action actually is a sum total of 0. So in this case, if you're telling me that Yush is a defining factor of the item actually transferring from the possession of the original owner to the thief, then, Rav, let's analyze this. You're telling me the reason why a person pays an additional penalty when they shecht the animal or when they sell the animals, because they've actually dug deeper into the accomplishment of the theft. The Gemara says there's nothing that actually happens. When the person sells the animal, the sale is not a good sale. He sold him the Brooklyn Bridge. You can't sell somebody an animal that doesn't belong to you. So what does it mean, that he dug his roots in even deeper? He didn't dig his roots in even deeper. Nothing happened when he sold it if there was no yesh. Ella, rather, what must this case be talking about? Lachar yesh. After the original owner already was miyayish, he despaired from ever getting it back. Now, if you're telling me that Yish actually works on its own to transfer the item from possession of the original owner to the thief, so it's kind of like a catch-22. If Yish didn't do anything, then selling it doesn't do anything. And now, Rav, according to you, that Yish itself is strong enough, and you don't need anything else to accomplish that the item is going to be transferred from the possession of the original owner to the thief, then hold on. The guy stole it. At the time that he stole it, it transfers physically from the possession of the original owner to the thief. Now, at what point does the item become under the ownership of the thief? When the guy is miyayish, when the original owner is going to despair from ever getting it back. Now, analyze this. At the time that he went ahead and sold the animal, or the time that he went ahead and shechted the animal, whose animal did he sell? His own animal. It's his animal. Again, granted, he acquired this animal in a fashion which is not proper. Nobody should be acquiring things through theft. But when it comes down to it, the bottom line is, the animal belongs to the thief. So therefore, why are we saying he's mishtaresh b'chet? He's digging his roots in even deeper to the chet. The chet is over. He stole it. The owner was miyayish. It now belongs to him. It's his animal. He can do whatever he pleases with this animal. He can eat it for lunch. He can sell it to somebody else. What does it mean? He's mishtaresh b'chet. The chet is done once he actually was miyayish, and it belongs to him. Now, of course, he has a chiyuv tashlum, and he has to pay this guy back. He's a thief, he has to do teshuvah. But again, with regard to the owner of the animal, the thief is the owner of the animal. So Gemara says, Amri, Kedama Rava, like Rava said, you misunderstood the concept of nishtarish b'chet. You thought nishtarish b'chet has to mean much more of like a halachic thing. That when he takes the second step, like he really digs his roots even deeper in to the concept or into the aveira of the theft. The Gemara just means this guy shows no remorse. He goes ahead, he stole something, he goes ahead even deeper, he's selling it, he's eating it. Guy makes a barbecue, invites all his neighbors over to eat all the stolen meat. You're right, happens to be it belongs to you, but sir, come on, recognize what's going on over here. You're shana b'chet, you're continuing perpetually to violate the isser of stealing, even though this is not actually halachically stealing, but again, he's shana b'chet, he's digging in even deeper. We'll explain it over here. What he means is also that he was shana b'chet, he repeated an action of chet. Tashamat. Now the Gemara is going to try to prove whether Rav is correct that Yeyosh itself, when the original owner gives up on never getting his item back, is that enough to transfer the item from the possession of the original owner to the thief? Utevacho umecharo. The pasuk tells us, with regard to one who steals an animal and shechts it, sells utevacha o mecharo. And the Gemara darshans mat tvicha she'ena chozeres, because it says tvicha and mechira in the same pasuk right near each other, just like the tvicha is something which is ena chozeres, is irreversible. Once a person slaughters an animal, the person can't unslaughter the animal. Af mechira, the same thing has to be true with regard to a sale. She'eno chazeres, it has to be a case of mechira where a person cannot reverse the sale. Now the Gemara says, what's that talking about? Emas. If you're talking about that he sold the animal before yesh, hold on. Amay eno chazeres. Why can't the sale be reversed? It's not his. You can't sell it, so it can be reversed. Ella, it must be that if for a person to accomplish a tvicha and mechira and be chayiv to pay the dalet v'hei, and it's going to be a case where it's irreversible, it must be lachar yesh, that it happens after he already gave up on getting it back. Now, if it's true that he actually now owns the item because the guy was miyayish, the original owner was miyayish, amay meshalem dalet v'hei. Why does he have to pay dalet v'hei? Shlohu tavech, shlohu mocher. The same concept. In other words, we find ourselves in a catch-22, because if the requirement is that the tvicha and mechira both have to be irreversible, in order for him to be chayiv to pay the 4 or 5 times, the 4 or 5-fold payment, so then let's try to find a case where this works. If it's before yeyosh, it's reversible, because it's not his. He has no permission to sell it. So the whole sale is just a game. So the whole thing can be reversed. So it must be it's talking about after Yesh. Now, according to Rav, Yesh actually accomplishes that it changes from the possession of the original owner to the thief. So now, as bad as this sounds, it's his item. It belongs to him. He's allowed to sell it. He's allowed to eat it. Again, as we said a few times, doesn't mean he acquired it in the most appropriate way. He stole it, but it's his. So therefore, why would he have to pay the additional penalty of 4 or 5 times? It's actually his animal, and he's allowed to sell it. Mar says, "K'dam Rav Nachman, what you're misunderstanding over here is that when we're talking about the sale being complete and not reversible, that was prat l'shehikne l'shloshim yom. He just meant that we're excluding a case of a lease. When the person leases it, that's not a case where he has to pay 4 or 5 times. So hachanami prat l'shehikne l'shloshim yom, we're coming to exclude a case where he was makna the animal for 30 days. If you look at Rashi, just a little bit lower than this Gemara, he says, Elo lema'ute hecha delo machar ganav l'lokeach elo lasos ba melacha shloshim yom. In other words, he sold it to him with giving him the rights to use the animal for 30 days. It's just like any type of renting it or any type of long-term lease. But again, that's not considered selling it. So again, we don't have a kasha on Rav. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question on Rav from a 3-part brisa. 3 cases. All 3 cases have a different halacha, and then we're going to analyze some of the cases, and then perhaps have to do some mechanical work on this brisa to try to fix it up, because we're going to find some issues with it. Meisvei. Let's ask a kasha from a brisa. Ganav, a person stole something, uba achar ugenavo. A typical classic case of a gonev min a ganav. Ganav 1 steals the item, then Ganav 2 steals it from Ganav 1. What's the halacha? The Brisa tells us, Harishon mishalem tashlume kefal. The first Ganav is going to pay tashlume kefal. Why? Because he's a Ganav. V'asheni eina mishalem el karen bilvad. The second thief only pays the principal back to the first Ganav, but he does not pay kefal, which is exactly consistent with our Mishnah. That so the first guy who was a thief, he's the original thief, he pays back the original owner the value of the animal plus the additional penalty of the kefal. The second ganav only pays back the principal, and he does not pay back any kefal. Ganav umachar, second case. A guy went ahead, stole an animal, umachar, and he sold it. Now uba'achar ugenavo, and another person came and stole it from the buyer. So let's just give some names of here. Ruvain originally owns the animal. Shimon steals the animal and sells the animal to Levi. Yehuda comes along and steals the animal from Levi. Okay, what's the halacha? Harishon. So in this case, his name is going to be Shimon. Mishalem tashlumi arba v'chamisha. He's a regular ganav who was a tavachu machar, so he has to pay a 4 or 5 times payment. V'hasheni, the second thief, mishalim tashlumei kefal. He has to pay tashlumei kefal. So this is Yehuda has to pay tashlumei kefal to Levi. The last case, ganav v'tavach. So here you have, he doesn't steal it and sell it, rather he steals it and slaughters the animal, he shechts it. The halacha is, uba'achar uganavo. Now a guy came and stole the shechted meat. So I don't know what hechsher it had on it. But the bottom line is, the original guy, you have Reuven owns an animal, Shimon steals it and shechts it, Levi comes ahead and steals that meat. Okay, what's the halacha? Harishon, Shimon's mishalim tashlum midal b'hei. Shimon, who's a regular ganav, he stole it, and he's a toveach. He's a toveach. He's not a mochi, he's a toveach. The halacha is he pays dalad v'hei, the 4 or 5 times payment to Reuven. V'asheni, now this third person who gets involved over here, Levi eina mishalim tashlumei kefal ella karen bilvad. He pays just karen, just the principal value, back to the first ganav, to the second owner in this case. Now, katani miyas. Let's go back and look at one case. Mitziasa. Which case? Katani miyas mitziasa. Katani miya mitziasa. We learned the middle case, and we'll repeat it. Ganav, a person stole, umachar, and he sold it, ubachar, uganavo. Another person came and stole it from the purchaser, from the ganav. The halacha is, harishon, the first ganav is mishalim tashlumi dalad v'hei. He pays the 4 or 5 times payment. V'asheni mishalim tashlumi kefal. The second thief is going to pay tashlumi kefal. Now the Gemara analyzes this. So again, just from a simple understanding, it makes sense. Why? Because Shimon's a ganav, and he went ahead and sold it. So he is a ganav who is mocher. He has to pay 4 or 5 times payment to the original owner. Now, another guy came along and stole it from the buyer. So it sounds like the case would restart. In other words, you hit the reset button once it's sold. And once it's sold, now there's an entirely new case. You have a guy by the name of Levi, bought an animal from somebody whose name is Shimon. He doesn't know the guy's a thief. He went ahead and bought an animal. Now, Yehuda goes ahead and starts the story all over again. It would make sense. He would have to be careful. The problem just isn't the technicalities of this case. And let's say, Amos. When did this sale happen? If you're telling me that the sale happened before Ruvain, the original owner, gave up on never getting it back, then Sheni, Amay Meshalam Tashlumei Kefal. Why is it that the second person has to pay Tashlumei Kefal? Shino Rishus below Yeyosh. It transfers from one property to the next, but there's no Yeyosh in this case. So it doesn't work. And therefore, would anybody actually say that the sale actually takes effect? In other words, it's not just a ceremonious type of transaction. It has to actually be a real transaction. Now, if the original owner was not miyayesh, then the sale doesn't work. Rather, what must be said? What must we say? It's talking about la'achar yeyosh. The original owner gave up on never getting his animal back. So let's analyze this. Now, Rav, remember you told us that yeyosh itself transfers the animal from one place to the next. Let's just look at this. We're talking about after yeyosh. If you're telling me that yeyosh itself works and the thief, the first thief, now owns it, why does he have to pay the 4 or 5 times payment? He went ahead and sold his own item. In other words, it doesn't sound very good. His behaviors are not good behaviors, but the bottom line is, the animal is his. He stole it. The original owner, according to Rav, was miyayish, and therefore the acquisition takes place. Now the Ganav owns the animal. When he sells it, he's making a regular transaction of his own property. V'su, in addition to Katani Reisha, it says in the first case, Ganav uba'achar u'ganavo. Regular case of Ganav achar Ganav. What's the halacha? Rishon masham tashlumei kefal. The first person pays the kefal, the additional double payment. V'asheni enu masham al karen bilvad. The second one, the second thief, only pays karen by itself. He just pays the principal and no additional penalty, no additional fine. Now hold on. Mechti, you just told me that we're talking about a case where it's after yeyosh. La'achar yeyosh kaimina. Let's try to be consistent through all the cases. If we're talking about a case where the second theft happened after the original owner was miyayesh, now visa kedaitach yeyosh kona, Rav, according to you, tells us the yeyosh itself allows the animal to be transferred from one person's possession to the next. Now, Sheni Amayin Mashalim. Why is the second thief potter from paying kefil? Amayin Mashalim El Karen. Why is he only paying the principal, not the Karen? In other words, Rav, we have a big problem with these prices over here because these prices seem to indicate that it must be talking about a case where there is yesh. This price seems to understand, even though there was yesh, still the halacha is that it doesn't transfer possession from the original owner to the thief. Elalav, what must we say? Shmamina Yeyosh Lokani V'Kasha Larav. We must conclude from this price that Yeyosh is not going to accomplish the transaction, the acquisition, and therefore it's going to be difficult for Rav. Amar Rava now comes along to try to save Rav. But his Brahma Taretztim. Are you going to suggest that this price is mitaretz? In other words, there are some prices that have been reviewed and confirmed as prices that are true. However, Rava says this can't be one of those. This price seems to be problematic in and of itself. I didn't mention this when we went through it because the Gemara is going to actually ask this question, but there's just a simple problem in this price, an inconsistency between case 2 and case 3, and the Gemara is going to explain it. El Diktani Seifa. Let's look at the same for the last case. Gana v'tavach. If you went ahead, stole it, v'tavach, and shechted it. Uba achar uganavo, and another person came ahead and stole that shechted meat. What's the halacha? Our brisa says, Rishon Mishalem Tashlumi Arba v'chamisha. The first thief pays a payment of 4 or 5 times its value. V'sheni Eina Mishalem El Karen. The second one, the one who stole the meat, only pays Karen and not Kefel. Now hold on a second. Umi ikulaman amar shinoi maisa lokani. Hold on a second. Something doesn't make sense over here. Is there anybody who's going to say that when you shecht the animal and turn it from a live animal into lunch, that's not good enough to accomplish a kinyan, a transfer of possession, an acquisition? This is like the biggest type of shinoi possible. He shechted the animal. It's not an animal anymore. Now it's food. So there's a problem. How can we understand that last case that says that the guy steals and shechts it, and another person goes ahead and steals the meat, that the subsequent ganev doesn't have to pay kefil because it's a gonav achar a ganev? Everybody should agree in that case that once the animal is now in the butcher shop, that the animal is no longer the possession of the original owner, because the original owner owned an animal. This is not an animal, this is meat. So therefore the brisa itself doesn't make sense. So therefore the Gemara says we have to try to fix up this brisa. Let's try to understand what's going on over here. Ela la'olam kul lifnei yish. The whole thing is talking about before Yesh, and this actually works well with Rav. It's consistent with what Rav said, that all these cases of Gonav Achar Ganav are all talking about before Yesh, because after Yesh, there would be an additional payment of Kefil. So therefore, La'olam, all these prices are talking about Lefnei Yesh, before anybody had to spare from getting it back. And what we must do is V'epoch Seifa L'mitziasa U'mitziasa L'seifa. We have to flip the last case with the middle case and the middle case with the last case. V'eimahachi. And we'll read it as follows. So the Gemara actually does us a very big service by rewording the brisa. Sometimes when the Gemara says epoch, you have to figure out by yourself how to turn it around. The Gemara actually goes ahead and does it for us. This is how we should read it. Ganav umachar, a person went ahead and stole something and sold it. Uba achar uganavo, and another person went and stole the sold item. Harishon mishalem tashlumi arba v'chamish. The first guy pays the 4 or 5 times payment, which makes a lot of sense. He's a typical ganav who was toveach u'mocher. In this case, he was mocher. V'asheni, the second thief, eino mishalim ella Karen. He only pays Karen. So no kefil in that case, just Karen. Why? The Gemara explains. The shinoi rishus below yeyosh lo kani. Simply transferring an item from one person's physical possession to another person's physical possession does not actually accomplish an acquisition. Just moving something from someone's backyard to another person's backyard doesn't mean that the person actually takes ownership over it. So therefore, in the second case, where he stole it and sold it, it actually still belongs to the original owner, and therefore, when the person subsequently steals it from that person, then there's not going to be a payment of kefil. Ganav v'tavach, however, the case where there is a theft and he actually kills the animal, he slaughters it and turns it into meat, in such a case, a person steals that meat, which is very logical. It makes sense. This is talking about, again, before Yesh. The halacha is he's a ganev, and then he shechts the animal. Then that person, we understand, he has to pay 4 or 5 times the payment. Vasheni mishalem tashlumei kefil. The second person who now goes ahead and steals it, he pays tashlumei kefil. He pays the double payment. Why? This makes a lot of sense. Why? Because what do you have? You have a case of a person who stole it, and then he did a shinoi maisa. He actually changed the animal. A physical, tangible change was made in the animal. Now another person goes ahead and steals that meat. Hasheni mishalem tashlumei kefil. Why? The kanya b'shinoi maisa, because he actually acquired the animal with a shinoi maisa. And now at least the brisa makes sense. And we don't have a problem with Rav. In other words, Rav said all this is talking about before Yish. We made the Brisa work to be discussing a case where it's before Yish. And we had a problem with just understanding the last case in the Brisa. We fixed that up. We explained that really it was just a mistake. Where there's a Shinoi Maisa that takes place, everybody agrees that the second thief is actually going to have to pay kefil. Why? Because it transfers rishus, it goes from one person's possession to the next. Where there's simply a shinoi of makom, where it goes from one place to the next, that's not enough to actually accomplish an acquisition, and therefore the second thief is not going to be responsible to pay the kefil because it's a gonav and a ganav. Rav Papa says lolam lo tepach. Really, let's not turn it around. Let's keep everything the same. Because remember when the Gemara said before, umi ikalaman da'amar, is there anybody who says that a shinoi maisa doesn't work? The Gemara is actually going to say, if you were here on Shabbos, then you remember, yes, there was somebody who says that. Seifa beis Shammai he. The seifa is beis Shammai. The Amri, they say, shinoi bimkoma omid. Even if you make a physical change to an item, it still remains in the original position, means it still belongs to the original owner. Remember, that was the case of the Esnan. It was Chitim, Vyasa Soles, Zaysim, Vyasa Shemen. Those were cases where a physical change was made to an item that was stolen. The person took olives and turned it into olive oil. It's a physical change. It's not the same thing. It's no longer a fruit. It's an oil. Nevertheless, Beis Shammai is of the opinion that it still maintains its original identity, it still belongs to the original person. The Gemara says, if that's the case, hihachi kasha reisha. Why in the reisha? The first case, which is a regular typical case, then we said that there's no kefil. Umitziyasa l'rav. In other words, kasha reisha mitziyasa l'rav. The first and second case is going to be difficult with Rav because seems like it's talking about after Yish. Amar of Zvid, La'olam kul lifnei Yish. Zvid says we have to say it's all talking about lifnei Yish. Before he actually gives up, V'achamai skinon, shenisyaishu habaylim bilo keyach, lo nisyaishu beganav. He explains this is talking about a case where we have knowledge from the original owner as to at what point in time he despaired getting it back. So in other words, it's not just a simple, he was miyayish, he wasn't miyayish. No. Originally, when his animal was stolen, he hoped to get it back. At a certain point in time, he said, you know what, forget it, I'm never getting this animal back. So therefore, to have a yish, you're going to have yish by the second person. Now the Gemara says, it's not because you need to have yish and shini rishus, and that's why we established it to be talking about a case where he was miyayish, only when it transferred to the second person's possession. Ella, afilu b'yish l'chudei nami kani. Rav is right that even with yish itself, he would take possession over it. We're gabi ganav, by the actual ganav. Ella de l'mashkachas mishalmi tarbayu ganav rishon v'ganav sheni el ba'achi. The only time we could find a way to figure out how both ganavim are going to be chayav kefil is when you make the yish happen by the second guy. That's why we established it to be the case, not because it's a necessity. The Gemara goes on. Gemara says, Itmar, hamocher lifnei yish. If a person steals something and sells it before yish. So we have a machlokes over here, machlokes amiroin. Rav Nachman says, chayiv. It's a typical case of a ganav umachar, and he has to pay the additional fine. Rav Shesha says pater, he is exempt from the additional fine. Rav Nachman says he's chayiv. Why? Because of machar om rachmana. The Torah says that if a thief steals it, he has to pay the additional fine. And ladies and gentlemen, he sold it. Maybe it's not a halachic sale, maybe it's not a good sale, but he actually went ahead and did it. Makes no difference when it happened. Rav Shesha says pater, he is pater from paying. Why? Because the chiyuv is only when his sale actually took effect and it worked. Before Yish, where his sale is just basically an exercise in futility because nothing's going to happen, it doesn't actually produce any result. He may have gone through the motions, he might feel like he sold something, it might be a nice ceremony, but the bottom line is, lo ahanu maisav, the sale doesn't take effect and it goes back to the original owner. In such a case, Lo mechayev. He won't be mechayev. Why? Dumir to tvicha. Similar to a case of shachting. Be'inon. It has to be, in other words, dumir to tvicha be'inon, we have to have a mechira, a sale, that's similar to shachting. Why? Da'ahanu ma'asav, where it actually accomplished something. If a person shachts an animal and finds out that he didn't actually shacht it, so then he's not going to be chayev to pay Dalad v'hei. In other words, a person makes believe he's shachting. The animal is not shachted. Of course, everyone agrees that just taking something and going through the motions of thinking that you're shachting, he held the knife backwards. So he thinks he shachted it. Everyone's going to say, listen, you didn't shacht it. He doesn't have to pay the extra penalty. Same thing is true if a person goes through the motions of a sale, but the sale doesn't work, according to Rav Sheshis, it's not going to actually accomplish anything. You won't have to pay the additional fine. Amar Rav Sheshis, Mina Minala. Where do I know this from? Tanya, for I learned in the Rabbi. So we saw this before. Amar Rav Akiva, why did the Torah tell us that if a person shechts or sells the animal, he pays the additional penalty of 4 or 5 times? Why? Because he rooted himself deeper with the chait of his theft. Amos, when does this happen? If this happens before Yesh, does it actually, do his roots dig deeper into the ground? You must say it's talking about after Yesh, after the original owner gave up. So Amarava, Rava said, like we said before, no, it doesn't actually mean that he is digging his roots deeper. El Shoshana B'chet, he just continued in his sinful ways. Tashema, the Gemara goes ahead and tries to bring a raya. Utavacho umacharo. The pasuk says, Utavacho umacharo matvicha sheno chazeres. Just like tvicha, something which is irreversible. Af mechira sheno chazeres. The same thing has to be true with regard to a sale that it's not reversible. We had this whole Gemara earlier today. So Amos, when did this happen? Ilem lifnei yesh. If you're telling me this happens before you actually gave up, why are you telling me that it's Eino Chazaras? The sale is just worthless. Just reverse it. Bring it back to the original owner. El Achiyish must be talking about a case of after Yish. Now we see that the Chiyuv is after Yish, which is exactly in opposition to Rav. It's exactly in opposition to Rav, and also it's in opposition to Rav Nachman. Gemara says, Tirgum of Nachman will explain, Prat l'shikna lo l'shloshim yom. This case doesn't mean to talk about Yish at all. It's simply coming to exclude a case where the sale wasn't a full sale. He simply leased it to him. So in other words, basically the exact same Gemara, we tried to use this exact raya against Rav. The Gemara attempts the same thing against Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman answers the same way and says the permanent sale that we're talking about doesn't actually mean it has to be an irreversible sale because of the Yish aspect. What we just mean is that the sale should be a sale which is a sale, a chalutin, which means it's a permanent sale as opposed to a temporary lease. Gemara says, "V'afra Belazar Savar." We can also prove that Belazar is of the opinion that chiyuva la'achar yish. The chiyuv, the additional payments, are only after yish, but not before yishu. The Amar of Nachman, the Amar of Belazar. For Belazar taught us, top of Samaches on the base. Teda. We can prove shestam geneva yiush bailamhu. A normal geneva, under normal circumstances, as soon as something is stolen, the bailam are going to despair from ever getting it back. Why? Shari Amar Torah. The Torah told us, Tavach umach u'mashalom tashlum yarba v'chamisha. A person goes ahead and shechts it and sells it, and he has to pay 4 or 5 times its value. Now hold on a second. Maybe the guy was never miyayish on it. Elalav, so Rabbi Lazar tells us, Mishum Da'amri, the reason why the payment is going to be imposed on him is because the Amri, we assume, Stam Genevi Yeyosh Bailam, under normal circumstances, there's going to be Yeyosh. In other words, a person we assume something was stolen, how is the person going to get it back? Is it possible to find the thief? Therefore, he's Miyayish. The Amri Stam Genevi Yeyosh Bailam he. And therefore, we try to prove that Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that you have to have the yish. In other words, if he's going to make this ukimta to say that we assume that every time something is stolen, there's yish, it must be, he is of the opinion that you have to have yish. The Gemara says, maybe he'll be mechayev him the additional fine, even though he was not miyayish. Amri lo sakadaitach. You won't think that way. Dumi to tvicha. It has to be similar to tvicha. Ma tvicha do ahana maisav. Just like tvicha, it actually accomplished something. Af mechir do ahana maisav has to be that it actually did something. V'ilifnei yish, if it's talking about before yish, mayahanu. How could it have happened? So Gemara says, okay, fine. So let's talk about after Yish. But maybe the Dilma, the Shaminu de Yayish. Maybe the only time that the additional fine is going to be imposed is when we heard the guy was Miyayish. Amri, the Gemara says, Lo Sakadaitach. You would never think that way. Why? Because Dumi de Tvicha. It has to be similar to Tvicha. Ma Tvicha la'alter. Just like Tvicha, as soon as you shecht it, there's no going back. You don't have to actually hear and confirm the guy was miyayish. Af mechira li'alter, the mechira also has to take place immediately, not only once you hear that the guy was miyayish. Amar le Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan went ahead and said, Geneva benefesh tochiach. When a person steals a nefesh, steals a person, kidnapping, that will prove what the halacha is. Why? She'ein yish bailim. There's no such thing as yish bailim. Why? The person himself is never going to be miyayish. So this is one of these cases where I will tell you, I know that I'm giving daf this morning, but everybody knows if Rabbi Silber was giving daf this morning and was learning this amud, and he was talking about a person, if you look at Rashi over here, it's a very important Rashi. Agonev nefesh shemacharo ein kan yish. Why? She'ein adam misyayesh al atzmo. If anybody was at the drasha this past week, you know, Rabbi Silber would spend a tremendous amount of time on this line in the Gemara. He probably wouldn't finish the daf. Why? Because ein shum yesh ba'olam. People sometimes find themselves in difficult situations. People find themselves close to despair, but people never ever give up on themselves, or people should never give up on themselves. Why? Because possessions are possessions. Person loses his item because it got stolen, you can go ahead and be miyayish. But a person on themselves is never ever miyayish. What's the point in this Gemara? Kidnapping will prove us the halacha. Why? There's never ever yish for a person on himself. V'chayiv, still the one who goes ahead, kidnaps the person, sells the person, is still chayiv. V'chlal, the Savar Rabbi Yochanan l'fnei yish chayiv. We see from Rabbi Yochanan that before yish he's going to be chayiv. Lacha yish mai. What's going to be the halacha after yish? So here Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv. He will still be chayiv the additional payment. Rish Lakish Amar Pater. Rish Lakish says Pater that he's not obligated to pay the additional fine because he was miyayish. Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv. Why? Because the chiyuva, the obligation is bein lefnei yish, bein la'achar yish, whether it's before or after yish. Rish Lakish says pater. Why? Because the chiyuva lefnei yishu, aval achar yish kana, after yish, like we said many times this morning already, after yish, the ganav already takes possession of the item that he stole. V'shelo toveach, v'shelo mocher, and it belongs to him. The Gemara now goes ahead and asks the kasha. Eitz for Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan went ahead and challenged Rish Lakish on this halacha. Again, Rabbi Yochanan says as a chiv even after yish. And Rish Lakish told us that after yish he is pater. So Rabbi Yochanan asks him a question. Ganav v'hikdish, a person went ahead and stole an item, and now it becomes a big tzaddik. He takes the stolen item, he's makdish it, he gives it to Ekdish, he gives a massive donation, he wants to get his name on the building. V'yachar kach, afterwards, tavach. He went ahead and shechted it. Mishalem tashlumi kefal, ve'enu mishalem tashlumi arba v'chamisha. He pays kefal for the theft, but there's no payment, there's no requirement to pay the arba v'chamisha because he shechted it. So Gemara says, hold on, let's analyze this. Amos, when did all this happen? If you want to suggest this is talking about before Yish, mi kadosh. Does it even become kadosh? That can't work. Ish ki yakdish es beiso kodesh amar achmana. Torah tells us a person who chooses to be makdish, to consecrate his own house. Ma beiso shalo. The basic, simple principle is just like your house is yours. Afkal shalo. Anything you want to donate to the Beis Hamikdash, you want to consecrate to Hektish, the prerequisite is that it's yours. Ela pshita la'achar yish. Must be it's talking about after the guy was miyayish, the original owner was miyayish. V'taima to Hektish. You know why he's not going to pay the dalad v'hei? Because he was makdish it. The time of the hikdish who deinim mishalim taslum arba v'chamisha the chi katavach the hektish katavach. The reason why he doesn't have to pay the additional 4 or 5 times payment is because when he shechted it, it wasn't his. It belonged to the Beis Hamikdash. Avolo hikdish. What if he was not makdish it, and then tavach, and when he went ahead and shechted it, it would seem that he has to pay the 4 or 5 times payment. Now, if you're telling me that Yish actually works to transfer from one possession to the next, was you have to pay it. It actually is once he shechts it or once he sells it. So Rish Lakish said back to him, I'm sorry. You misunderstood. This is talking about a case over here, which is Kagon Shekdishu Bailim Biyad Ganav. The Ganav is not giving a donation to Hektish. That doesn't make sense. Talk about a thief. He steals something, giving a donation to Hektish. That's not appropriate. Rather, what are we talking about? Where the owner, the original owner, had his item stolen. He said, I'm not miyayish on this item. I don't know if I'll get it back or not, but I'm not miyayish. I continue to look for it, to search for it, but for the meantime, I'm donating this animal to Hektish. Now the Gemara says, okay, that sounds very nice, but umi kadosh, is that actually going to work? Rabbi Yochanan said, if someone stole something and the original owner was never miyayish, shneim einam yachon lahaktish. Both the thief and the original owner cannot be makdish this animal. Why? Zel if yishen shalo, the ganav can't do it because guess what? It's not yours. You don't have permission to give it to hektish. The zel if yishen bershuso, this guy can't do it because it's not in his possession. You can't give something to hektish if you don't have jurisdiction over it. Gemara says, Amri, he responded, Hu damar kitsnuin. He paskins like the tznuin. The Tnan, who are these tznuin? Tznuin are these private people. The Tnan at tznuin, manichin es hamos, v'om kol nilkut mizeh, yemichul alamos ha'elu. Just very quickly, this is talking about a case where you had a vineyard which was a neta ravai, was in its 4th year. So it's not Orla, but in the 4th year the halacha is basically true like Ma'aser Sheni. It can only be eaten in Yerushalayim or redeemed onto money. If it's eaten in Yerushalayim, that's fine. If it's redeemed onto money, it can be eaten anywhere. So these tznuim recognize that some people would come by and just pluck off some of the grapes from this vineyard, and what they wanted to avoid people eating it in the wrong place, so therefore they left money there. They said if the person's going to go ahead and steal it, I want to be mechal it onto the money like this, they won't have an additional aveir on their hand. So in other words, but the bottom line there is that they are being mechal these grapes onto money after it's already in the possession of the ganav. So clearly there's this opinion that you can actually accomplish a transfer of an item either from personal possession to hektish or from personal possession be mechal it onto money. In those cases, it will work. Now the Gemara says, but hold on. If that's the case, this means that the actual principle came back to the original owner. In these cases, you look at Rashi, if you're talking about that the actual owner was makdish it, that means they're taking possession over it. If that's the case, kefal amay mishalim harei chazer karen liyadam. Why is he paying kefal? They already got it back. They took their item back and they did what they wanted to do with it. They gave it to hektish. So why is there any kefal? They returned the item to its original owner. Gemara says k'shamad bedin. What's talking about is that he went to Beis Din and Beis Din gave a psak. Now hold on. The Gemara says, hey chidami, what happened in Beis Din? Ida amrit say tain loy. If the dayanim told the guy, hey, you're a thief, go give it back to the original owner. So my Aryeh hektish, I feel loy hektish. What is the consecration of anything to do with anything here? Beis Din gave a psak. I feel like this naim lo l'chayva. He wouldn't be chayiv. Damar Rava say tain lo. Once Beis Din gives a psak and says you have to give it back, then tavachu machar pater. He's going to be pater. My time even to paskua lamilsa the tavachu machar havli gazlan. Once the psak was made and he goes ahead and brazenly shechts it, he's not a ganav anymore. He's an outright gazlan in front of everyone's face. He stole it. The gazlan him sham tashlumi arba v'chamisha. We know from our Mishnah, a gazlan does not pay arba v'chamisha. What happens? So then, rather, what do you want to say? Top of Testament Aleph. Chayiv ata litain lo must be based on just said you're obligated to give it to him. My taima kivan lo paska lemilsa. Sorry, kivan lo paska milsa akati ganafu. Since they only gave the psak that he's chayiv to give it, but didn't tell him to go ahead and give it, then he's a ganafu. So then, lo tzricha da'amri chayiv ata litin lo. The Gemara says it must be that's the case. Hamad Bedin was talking about with the Beis Din told him chayiv ata litin lo. They did not say tein lo. Have a wonderful day. We'll stop here. Top of Samach Tes Amud Aleph.